We look around today and we see more than 8 billion people living on this planet. Cities glowing at night, planes carving through the sky, ships slicing across the oceans. We see humanity everywhere, in every climate, every continent, every landscape imaginable. But none of this was guaranteed. None of this was inevitable. There was a moment so far back in time, so deeply buried in our forgotten past, that humanity came shockingly close to disappearing forever. A moment when the entire story of our species, every culture, every language, every face was hanging by a thread. This is the story of the time our ancestors almost went extinct. It is not a myth or a legend. It is a chapter written in ice, fire, hunger and survival. A chapter carved into our DNA, preserved not in fossils or ruins, but in the living memory of our bodies. And the fact that any of us are here today is nothing less than extraordinary. Humanity hasn't always been strong or widespread. Before cities, before agriculture, before even the earliest sparks of modern imagination, our ancient relatives walked through a world that was unpredictable, unforgiving, and filled with dangers that tested the limits of endurance. The earth they knew was colder, harsher, and ruled by forces far greater than themselves. They did not control the environment, they survived it. We like to think of ourselves now as powerful and established. But if we wind the clock back far enough, there was a time when our entire family line was closer to disappearing than thriving. A time when survival was not about comfort, careers or technology, but about staying alive one more night. Picture Earth around 900,000 years ago. There are no cities, no roads, no artificial light, just dark forests, open plains and towering mountains carved by ice. The climate is beginning to shift in ways that will reshape everything. Ice ages have come and gone before, but something different is happening now. Deep within the rhythms of the planet, the cycles of warming and cooling are changing. Winters are growing harsher. Ice sheets are thickening and stretching further south. Warm seasons are shortening. Storms are changing direction. What used to be a predictable pattern of seasons is becoming wild and extreme. Scientists today call this the mid-Pleistocene transition, a turning point when Earth's climate cycles slowed down, but the cold periods became longer and far more brutal. Regions that once supported grasslands and forests began to dry out or freeze over. Rivers changed their paths, lakes shrank. The animals our ancestors rely on start to migrate away or vanish. The world they depended on is slipping out from beneath their feet. Our ancient relatives, species like Homo erectus, had already proven themselves resilient. They had endured droughts, predators, volcanic activity, and competition with other species. They had spread across Africa and into parts of Eurasia, adapting to countless challenges. They were not weak or primitive in their own time. They were survivors. But the mid-Pleistocene transition was unlike anything they had ever faced. Food became scarce. Reliable water sources dried up. Whole regions that once supported life were now covered in ice or turned into barren land. With fewer resources came fewer births. Groups that once numbered in the thousands shrunk to hundreds. Some disappeared completely. Life became a daily battle, not for dominance, but for basic survival. In our modern world, we adapt quickly because we have technology, transport, medicine, and global communication. We can move food around the planet, warn each other of disasters, develop new tools in months. But nearly 1 million years ago, our ancestors had none of that. They had stone tools, simple shelters, and the strength of small communities. When the environment turned against them, there was no backup plan. If the land failed, people died. And then something strange shows up in the record, both in bones and in blood. When scientists look at fossils from this time, they see a silence. For hundreds of thousands of years, there are far few Hominum remains. This isn't total emptiness, but it is a dramatic decline. For a long time, many thought this was just a gap created by chance. Fossils are rare. Conditions have to be perfect for bones to survive and be found. Maybe those perfect conditions just simply weren't there. But as genetic technology advanced, the story grew more serious. Hidden inside the DNA of every living human, every family line, every heritage, every nation, researchers found signs of a dramatic population collapse long before Homo sapiens existed. Patterns that did not match a large, stable population, but a small, struggling one. A bottleneck, a squeeze. A moment when the number of surviving ancestors dropped so dramatically that the future of the entire human line hung on a thread. Some genetic models suggest that the ancestry population may have shrunk to fewer than 1,300 breeding individuals. Others suggest slightly more, but no serious models suggest that everything was fine and stable. Something enormous happened. Imagine that. The entire human lineage, several continents, billions of lives, thousands of cultures reduced to numbers that could fit inside a single small town. Picture every human ancestor alive on Earth, fitting into a handful of camps scattered across a harsh, frozen landscape. No backup population somewhere else, no untouched continent waiting to rescue them, just a few pockets of life surrounded by cold, hunger, and danger. A single drought, a single new predator, a single disease moving through those small groups could have ended the human story before it began. Yet it didn't. So how did our ancestors survive when everything around them seemed designed to wipe them out? The answer is a mix of resilience, adaptation, and the hidden mercy of the Earth itself. Even in the harshest climates, there are always pockets of refuge, valleys sheltered from the worst winds, regions where rainfall persists even when the wider land dries, coastal zones where the sea still brings food to the shore. Imagine a small group huddled in a sheltered valley where a river still flows when other streams have run dry. They know the patterns of the animals that come to drink. They know which roots are still edible when the season turns against them. They know the safe paths and the dangerous ones. Their knowledge of that land is not written in books, it is carried in stories, in memories, in scars. Another part of their survival story was innovation. Even before fire was fully mastered, early humans interacted with it. When lightning struck and set grasses ablaze, they followed behind, scavenging cooked remains of animals. They learned that fire meant opportunity as well as danger. They carried embers from natural wildfires. They began to realize that heat could soften roots, change the taste of food, and make meat easier to chew. Fire, even in its earliest clumsy form, brought warmth, protection, and possibilities. There is evidence that around 800,000 years ago, perhaps a little bit earlier in some regions, hominids were beginning to control fire more reliably. Whenever this breakthrough truly took hold, it was transformative. Fire changed everything. It allowed them to cook food, unlock more energy for the growing brains and making tough plants and meat more digestible. It offered warmth in the brutal cold seasons that had wiped out so many of their kind before. It extended the day, pushing back the darkness and opening new time for tool making, child rearing and storytelling. A fire at the center of a camp also changed the shape of community. People gathered around it. They shared food, they watched the flames and talked. They planned hunts. They warned the young. They remembered the dead. They learned to see themselves not just as scattered individuals, but as a unit, as a people. Even so, fire wasn't a magical solution that instantly healed everything. Recovery was painfully slow. It wasn't a sudden comeback, it was a long, fragile climb. For more than 100,000 years, the surviving populations remained small, vulnerable. One squeeze of bad winters, one failed hunting season, one new disease could still have wiped them out. Even every child that survived, every successful hunt, every warm night by the fire was part of a quiet, stubborn refusal to disappear. But gradually, as temperatures eased and climate stabilized for longer stretches, they began to spread again. Small groups moved along rivers, followed herds and explored new valleys. Genetic diversity, once crushed, slowly started to rise again as children inherited slightly different combinations of the remaining genes. New species emerged. The human family tree branched out. The ancestors of Neanderthals formed in Europe. Denisovians appeared in Asia, and much later, hundreds of thousands of years after that crisis, Homo sapiens would rise in Africa. That long ago collapse did not destroy us, it shaped us. Inside our DNA are marks of that ancient struggle, genetic patterns that reveal a time when diversity was lost, when only a few lineages remained, when the future of our species narrowed to the width of a needle's eye. Like a scar that has healed but never quite disappeared, that bottleneck still shows up in the code that builds every human today. Every living human today shares ancestry through those survivors. Every culture, every community, every story is connected by that fragile thread stretched across time. No matter what language we speak, no matter where we live, no matter what differences we see on the surface, our roots converge in a small group of ancient people who refuse to vanish. Think about the entire world they lived in. Entire continents were locked under ice. Storms raged across open plains. Predator populations flourished while many prey species declined. Nights were long, cold, and full of sounds that signaled danger. Food wasn't stored in cupboards or delivered in trucks. It had to be found, tracked, hunted, dug up, or gathered every single day. Yet they endured. They learned to read the land like a book, following tracks, recognizing the shape of distant clouds, listening for the movement of herds. They knew where to stand in a storm and where not to. They knew which plants cured stomach pain and which ones caused it. They built shelters from branches, bones, and hides. They sharpened stone into cutting edges and spear tips. They communicated danger, opportunity, and memory without writing a single word. Adaptation became the heartbeat of humanity. Slowly, painfully, a turning point arrived. As climates shifted once again and more stable, warm periods returned, populations grew, communities expanded, ideas spread more widely. Survival became more than just endurance, it became strategy. Strategy became culture. Culture became the foundation of everything humanity would one day build. The story of our near extinction is not just a scientific observation, it's a mirror held up to who we are. It shows us that fear, danger, and uncertainty are nothing new. Our ancestors lived through crises far more terrifying than anything we face today. They survived with no technology, no modern medicine, no global safety net, just perseverance and community, and the constant willingness to adapt. If fewer than a couple of thousand of them could rebuild an entire line of humanity from the edge of extinction, then we, with all of our knowledge and resources, are capable of overcoming the challenges in front of us. We are here because they endured, because they kept moving, because they taught their children how to survive and passed down knowledge around campfires under cold, star-filled skies. They refused to give up and everything seemed possible. And their legacy is inside every one of us. Look at your hands. Look at your family. Look at the world around you. None of this was guaranteed. It exists because a small group of ancient survivors held on through cold, hunger, fear, and hardship. Their courage was not recorded in books, but it lives in our bones. Their victories were not written down, but we live them every day. Their endurance shaped the world we now inherit. The time our ancestors almost went extinct is more than a scientific footnote. It's a reminder of the resilience that built us, a reminder of the strength woven into our very being, a reminder that even when everything seems uncertain, we come from a lineage that overcame the impossible. We come from survival. We come from strength. And that strength continues beating quietly but powerfully in us today.